For that shit.
Good afternoon, members. Good to see you here this evening. I think what I want to do is, for the record, let's just go around and say who is here, just so the record's clear as to who is in attendance today, and we'll start with you, Judge.
Manny Menendez, present.
I'm Rick Fernandez, present.
Ray Shermonte, present.
Dan Aprilli, present. Bob Hunter, present.
Audrey Sullivan Moore, present.
Chip Fletcher, present.
Sean Shaw, present.
Johnny Wong, IOC staff support.
Vanetta Kilpatrick, present.
Arthenia Joanna here.
Jay Hollenkamp, present.
Dan Rollerson, absent. I'm sorry I had to do that. But
If I would have bet money, you would have had something smart
you
to
knew
say.
I was going to do that, Mr. Chair, yeah. But I am here, okay.
I appreciate that, Representative Rawlson. Let's go ahead and, if there's any public comment, we'll take that at this time. If there's any member of the public that would like to address the IOC, we will be happy to take that at this time. Just come to the podium. If there is not, then we will move on.
We did receive an email from someone.
I'm sorry, we did get an email that in lieu of in-person public comment. So members, if you will look at the email from, what's the name?
Christopher Vila.
Christopher Vila. Look at that email, and that's the public comment for today. Are there any, I'm moving to section 3 now on the agenda. Are there any members' interest that we would like to discuss now before we get into the heart of the agenda for this evening? Okay. At this time, we're going to look at the minutes of October 21st, and if members are comfortable, I will certainly entertain a motion to accept those minutes.
I moved.
So moved. Oh, go ahead, Arthenia.
Do it.
All right.
I'll second it. Rick did it.
Say your name and then,
I move. I'm Rick Fernandez.
thank you.
Arthenia Joanna second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of October 21st, 2019. Everybody in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, thank you. Now let's get to the action items. Members, if you remember, we received several presentations last meeting, and we had some questions. So some of the agencies will be providing some follow-up, and one agency, HART, we didn't get to, so we're going to hear from them first for them to make their presentation to us this evening. So if HART will come forward and make their presentation, we'll be happy to hear it. Thank you.
Good evening, members of the Independent Oversight Committee. I'm Carolyn House Stewart, the interim CEO of HART. The HART Board of Directors reviewed and approved the program projects by resolution on September 9th, 2019, which will be presented for your review this evening. Justin Willits, the Senior Planner, Service Development at HART, will lead the presentation. Cindy Stieglitz, the HART Interim Chief Financial Officer, and Linda Crescentini, the Director of Enterprise Project Management, are in the audience to answer any additional questions for which Mr. Willis might need assistance. We thank you for this opportunity to share the HART projects for which we seek approval.
Good evening, committee, chair, and members. As introduced, I'm Justin Willits with the Service Development Department, and I'm going to give you an overview of our program of projects for the surtax. And I'll just go ahead and get right into it. Just wanted to give you a quick overview of our organization for some of you who may not be as familiar as others. The layout for this evening's presentation, we're going to go over a little background, go over the program of projects and how the foundation was created, identify those 2020 projects and the different program areas associated with them, and then review our certification statement and take any questions that you might have. A little bit about us. HART, we operate 10 streetcars, 184 fixed route buses, 73 HART Plus vans, and 12 flex vans. These vehicles carry about 34,000 trips a day on our bus and van fleet on 34 routes at about 2,200 stops. The Tico streetcar is currently doing about 2,300 trips a day at 11 stations along 2.7 miles. And our customers are overwhelmingly satisfied with the service we provide. We're in The ISA numbers you see there are industry standard average, and we exceed the industry standard and all of the metrics you see here, that our bus drivers operate the bus safely, they find it easy to gather information about our services, the prices are fair and reasonable, and they feel safe while riding the bus, and that we provide a value to the community. We conduct these customer surveys twice a year through onboard surveys. We have some interesting opportunities in Hillsborough County as the 10th fastest growing region in the nation. We're trying to harness a generational mind shift towards transit as a primary mode of transportation, but we do have some challenges, as we all know. Traffic congestion particularly is increasing. We have a sprawling service area, sometimes compared to states, and we have some limited right-of-way issues which make siting shelters and providing amenities for our passengers very troublesome and sometimes costly. We have some infrastructure at our park and rides that needs to be improved to capture more of the transportation demand and transit demand in the region. And we also have right-of-way issues associated with establishing bus lanes on our congested corridors. And of course, as we all know, safe connections for pedestrians and cyclists for getting to our services in particular can be very challenging. So to talk a little bit about the foundation of the 2020 Transportation Surtax program of projects, we look back to our transit development plan. The transit development plan is a 10-year plan that is updated every 5 years. A major update is done every 5 years, and then we do minor updates in the years between those major updates. This establishes a cost-feasible financial plan, which is based on the existing revenue the agency has, and also identifies a needs plan that establishes some of the needs that we don't have existing revenue for. These needs are really the basis for the program of projects and the lists that you'll see and that you have in front of you. Some of these needs are documented over decades. Some of them are from the past few years, but as we all know, the agency has had serious needs for increased funding for a very long time. So that's going to be really how we came to the list that we will review and take questions on later. These major transit development plans, the last one that we did was in 2017 and was the foundation for Mission Max, which came with some service cuts because of a lack of revenue. We perform a lot of community outreach during that effort, but also in the years in between then and now, and including this year about this program of projects that you're going to see. And of course, the transit development plan is consistent with the Hillsborough MPO's long-range transportation plan. So to get into the program areas of the surtax, our buckets are a bit different than the ones you've seen for the other agencies. Theirs are there are more buckets, and they're a little more complex. There was a lot of discussion about how to fit certain projects into certain buckets, and I feel like ours are a little more straightforward. We'll see how you guys feel about that. But we basically they're described as the largest being enhancing bus service. That includes express bus, neighborhood circulators, paratransit, and other modes that can be based on existing ridership, increasing service to more residents, land use, and also additional funding sources that may be available. The second bucket, expanding public transit options, also referred to as the fixed guideway bucket, is to be spent on transit service that utilizes exclusive transit right-of-way for at least 75% of the length of the service. That could be any type of rail that operates in its own right-of-way for 3/4 of the service. That could be a bus in its own guideway. The streetcar would qualify for this. So just to give you an idea of the potential projects that could come out of that bucket. And then the remaining funds are kind of a flexible spending bucket that can be spent on any project to improve public transportation. And how these buckets are allocated this year, 2 of the 3 buckets are fully allocated, which you can see in the second and third column. The first bucket, expanding public transit options or fixed guideway, we are mostly moving that funding into an escrow account as we develop those major projects that will be utilizing exclusive right-of-way. And I'll talk a little bit about where that $5.1 million is going in this surtax program shortly. General overview, you have the detailed project list in one of the handouts you've been given. But just to generally kind of give you an idea of how these funds have been allocated within the program. The only funds that we've allocated, that $5.1 million, within the fixed guideway bucket are dedicated to corridor assessments, a CSX evaluation, the streetcar extension, and potential future phases, the TDP vision update, the Marion Transit corridor evaluation, and some property assessments. As you can see, not all of those are funded out of the one bucket. They come from a variety of buckets, but those that are specific to evaluating fixed guideway service are coming from that bucket. Moving down the list, most of the items you see here are funded out of the enhancing bus service bucket or the remaining funds flexible bucket, such as service, the fare, mobility hubs and transit center enhancements, and some of the real estate issues we need to deal with for expanding our footprint and identifying relevant properties for our expansion. The fare box replacement is solely funded out of the enhancing bus service bucket, and that's upgrading our fare boxes and modernizing our equipment that are compatible with our Flamingo fare system. So to continue down the major project items, some rolling stock, or what we refer to for a vehicle acquisition. We've allocated funds from the second and third buckets for electric buses and charging stations, paratransit expansion and replacement, CNG expansion and diesel replacement, and some autonomous vehicle technology specifically related to the Marion Transitway. The maintenance line item here you see funded out of our remaining funds includes storage, a CNG tank upgrade, midlife overhaul of our vehicles, tools, equipment, and technology upgrades associated with maintenance. The bottom three line items funded out of the second and third buckets include the HART operations and maintenance facility. The CNG and skid replacement is basically describing how we refuel our CNG fleet, and the skid is a reference to some of the maintenance equipment that's associated with that. A fueling station for all of our fleet, environmental remediation at our 21st Avenue facility, some lighting issues, heavy maintenance, renovation, and also preventative maintenance of our fleet, which is really that midlife overhaul, and some certain things come out of there. For our technology line item, there are vehicle fluid tracking equipment, the CAD AVL, which is how we locate our vehicles when they are in service. We're in the process of upgrading that, and this is another piece of that program, which really is part of modernizing our fleet to provide a better service to our customers, where we have better real-time information and more accurate on-time performance throughout the network. There's also some technology related to customer experience, training programs, and some software support. And the last item for administration, we are modernizing our administrative policy, our environmental management recertification, our labor costs and staffing, operational contingency, and planning and design support for capital projects. Those are really a high level. There are detailed descriptions of these, as I said, in your packet. Moving on to the enhancing bus service, and this is what our customers are most interested in, is what are they actually going to see on the street across the county. And if we go back to what I referenced, Mission Max, the foundation of our last major TDP update, what we've heard since then is that the cuts in service were very impactful in a negative way a few years ago, which were based on our financial constraints. So we went out to the public and we asked them what they wanted to see restored in the network, and we took that back to our planning team and said what makes sense for the growth of this region and meshes with what our customers want to see. And for restoring service, we've gone with the following service areas: the university area, which includes North Florida Avenue and North 22nd Avenue, north of Fletcher. If you recall, most of the service was pulled down to Fletcher for a number of reasons during Mission Max, but we're trying to bring some service back to that area that so desperately needs it. Moving down the map, you'll see Sly Avenue from Net Park over toward the Leto High School area. And moving further down in the service area, Route 46 on Causeway Boulevard from the Brannan Mall through Palmetto Beach Ybor City into downtown, and then Route 4 through South Tampa down to MacDill Air Force Base on MacDill Avenue.
That slide you had up there a moment ago, those are the current services?
Those are to be restored with the surtax
Those are just the ones that
funding.
would be restored?
Correct.
Okay,
These are currently not in service.
gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome. Moving on to the other improvements associated specifically with our existing routes, some weekend improvements that we are moving forward with in the surtax program are specifically on routes 42 and 45, which connect West Shore to the university area, Route 15 on Columbus Avenue, Route 32 on MLK Jr. Boulevard, and Route 9 on 15th and 30th Street. Those would be moved from 60-minute weekend service to 30-minute weekend service. And then Route 31 in South County would be introduced with weekend service. It currently only operates Monday through Friday now. That has been a long desire for a lot of people, so we're really proud to have that in here. And now I will move on to some of the weekday improvements. And just to give you a little idea, we've had some success, and we're actually growing our ridership. The national trend for transit is on the decline in many places, but we are kind of going against the grain there. And a lot of those improvements in ridership we've seen since Mission Max are related to weekend frequency improvements. So we really think that this is going to make an impact because most of our transit riders need the service 7 days a week. It's not just a Monday through Friday thing for them. So we really think that those weekend improvements are very important for our customers. Finally, the weekday service frequency improvements on our existing network. We're moving forward with routes 42 and 45, again, connecting West Shore to the university area, Route 30 on Kennedy Boulevard, Route 32 on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and Route 12 on 22nd Street, connecting downtown to the university area. These are some of our core routes, and if you go back to the TDP being the foundation for this program, these improvements you see here that are based on frequency for the weekend and weekday are based on the first 5 years of that 10-year TDP. So what we're doing is we're taking what would have taken 5 years to develop as we increased our revenue without the surtax. We're moving those into the first year, assuming this new funding, and really moving forward with a core frequent network that's really going to help give people the option to take transit and reduce those waiting times for the people that are already using it. And that's kind of how the foundation, being the TDP, has been worked into our program of projects, if that makes sense. Generally, how this would look once the funds are released and we're able to utilize them, Phase 1 would be focusing on restoring service. Phase 2 would be focusing on those weekend improvements, and Phase 3 would be the weekday improvements. We're also funding some service that's currently in operation, which I'll touch on in a few slides. For that fixed guideway, expanding public transit options bucket, we've identified the following projects. We've moved money into the corridor assessments, which would be identified in some planning work that we're going to do in the next year. That's basically identifying those rapid transit corridors that we can potentially look at some fixed guideway projects on. That's also going to fund future streetcar extensions and evaluation of the CSX tracks within Hillsborough County. We're also partnering with the city on the existing planned extension of the Tampa streetcar, and then again that Marion Transitway corridor assessment I referenced earlier. The remaining funds bucket for planning efforts, we are funding a update to our major TDP a few years ahead of schedule. Like I said, we did the major update in 2017, but now that we are recognizing that new revenue, we need to update that TDP, and we'll be doing that next year with the remaining funds bucket. Some of the service that has been funded in the last few years by county and state grants is now not as available, so we're moving some of that into the remaining funds bucket. Those services are shown here, and as you can see, they cover a great bit of Hillsborough County, all the way from the northwest to the university area to MacDill, to Sun City Center and Fishhawk, and quite a bit in Brandon. Overall, for the service expansion, you can see that we're covering a lot of new service, or what we're calling restored service, replacing the county-funded service and improving those weekend and weekday routes that we discussed. The overview of these planned investments are frequency improvements and service expansion on 86 route miles of restored service, with 5 weekday and 6 weekend routes improved. Customer amenity improvements in the range of $6 million. The fare box upgrade for the existing fare payment system that will incorporate Flamingo fares, which is a regional fare collection system, if you're unfamiliar. And then $46 million in rolling stock that includes 10 pilot battery electric buses, 56 CNG compressed natural gas, and 53 non-revenue vehicles. And that's really rounds out most of the items. As discussed during my introduction, this was approved by the HART Board on September 9th and certified by our procurement office on September 27th. And at this time, I and a few other staff members will take any questions that you have.
Representative Rawlinson?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. Very good. What is a non-revenue vehicle? What does that mean?
That's staff support vehicles, and those are the smaller, often SUVs that are driving around. Supervisors use them quite a bit to go take operators to switch out shifts. They're used for a variety of issues.
Ms. Moore?
I have 2 questions. On the Heart by Numbers, you mentioned the 2.7 miles for the streetcar, 2,300 daily trips, and 34,000 daily trips for the bus and van. That's the number of going back and forth, the number of stops. Do you have numbers on actual ridership?
That's the actual
That's the actual
boardings.
ridership? Okay, that's what I wanted to know. And then the second
Which is
question-
the actual boarding?
The 2,300 on the streetcar and the 34,000 for the fixed route and van.
Okay.
And then in the implementation schedule, phase 1, 2, and 3, how did you determine phase 2 versus phase 3?
Well, I kind of touched on it earlier, but we wanted to first focus on restoring service because that's the highest priority for our customers, and then the weekend service to become more of a 7-day-a-week transit agency to provide that service to the folks that need it the most, and then focus on those weekday improvements because we already have service there.
Okay.
And we want to get to the point where we have a really frequent core network, but we have to do some work to reestablish our service to feed into that core network before we get there.
Good. Mr. Chiramonte, Mr. Fernandez, and then Judge Menendez.
Okay, I wanted to ask some questions, maybe more related to the future, but first, you said this will implement the complete Flamingo fare program?
The fare box replacement that I mentioned is compatible with Flamingo fare, but this is actually replacing, I believe, 30-year-old fare box technology. But the Flamingo fare is not all included in that line item. That's been funded with other sources over time. This is specific to our 30-year-old fare boxes.
Okay,
It's
so
just
that's
compatible with
moving
it.
that whole idea ahead, though, I guess.
Correct.
Right.
It's moving in tandem with the Flamingo fares.
Okay, another question.
Mr. Chiramonte, can you speak into the mic
Oh,
just so
sorry.
we can all hear you?
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that better? Okay. There seems like there's some areas that maybe need some improvement in the bus times, how often the buses run. And not so much for this first time, but I assume you're going to go back and study maybe some of the other local routes. For example, Dale Mabry. I've recently moved to a different part of town, and I have used the bus twice now. And the biggest thing is it doesn't come often enough, I think. And I think there's a lot of potential for ridership. I mean, basically, if you could get it where people on major arterials can just go to the bus stop and know that there's like 15-minute headways or something, and they don't have to worry about looking at the time that the bus comes. Are we looking at maybe doing that to actually get more choice riders people that have cars, but now because the bus is more convenient or they don't have to worry about parking or something, they might choose to do that.
Sure, that's exactly what the last TDP was striving for. Even with a underfunded transit network, we were really trying to build that core frequency. As I mentioned, we're expediting the first 5 years of the TDP. So if we were to expedite the second 5 years, say in 2021, I believe that, for example, Dale Mabry would be one of those routes to go from 30-minute frequency to 15.
Right.
But as part of our planning effort next year, we're going to be doing another operations plan, because the last one was based on very limited revenue and was kind of a different exercise than planning for the future in a robust expansion. So we want to kind of reprioritize some of those things. So we had that in mind when we prioritized the improvements that we've brought to you today.
Well, I think on a street like Dale Mabry, you have so many businesses, so many people that live close enough to actually walk to it. I took the bus to go to the Bucks game for the first time, and I'll never drive to the game again.
Right.
After doing that, it was so easy. I just timed it. I knew when it was coming, and I had a 10-minute walk. It got there within 5 minutes of when it said it would on the one bus away app, and I was there and didn't have to deal with all that other stuff.
All right.
And saved money. So I think people, if you get it working like that, more people that don't use transit now will be attracted to use it.
Totally agree.
Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, Justin.
Hey, Rick, how's it going?
Good. Okay, I'm going to come at this one page at a time, and I may just give the talking stick on to Judge Menendez after I get through planning. But my first couple of questions are on the planning page.
Sure.
And actually a preliminary question. I think you were here last month. I know you were here. I don't know if you were here for the City of Tampa's presentation or not, but you may or may not recall that we got into a question about supplanting of existing city funds with surtax funds.
Correct.
In fact, I'll give credit to my colleague here to the right, Ray Shermonti, because that was his intellectual property, and I'm stealing it here today. But I am curious. Can you represent to us that there is no place in this entire spreadsheet where there is any funding that has been supplanted, as we got into it with City of Tampa to some extent? You all were here to hear it. I'm just wondering if that had any effect on your presentation, on the projects that you've provided, the funding picture, if you will, if I've made that clear.
Yes, so the county-funded services are something that the county has agreed to fund if we don't get surtax. So that would almost fit that description. But we have a line item in service where we maintain current service levels, and we are moving $20 million in funded with surtax to allow general funding to be reallocated to reserves in accordance with our 90-day policy. That would be somewhat close to what you've said, but that is to come into compliance with our policy. If we were not doing that, then that would basically be service that had to go away. But that is a one-year allocation.
Is that the only place you can think of where it comes in? Because that actually is one that I had asterisks, as I was going to ask you about.
Yeah, that is correct. Yes, confirmed with our CFO.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Madam CFO. Okay, on the envisioned streetcar extension, this again is on the planning sheet,
Yes, sir.
the Phase 4 study. Just the verbiage, for further extension of the streetcar past the route of the current envisioned streetcar. As I recall it, the current envisioned streetcar takes the route north up Florida Avenue to Palm.
Correct.
Is there a thought already as to where this extension might lead, or is that what the study's about?
That's what the study's about.
So that's purely a question for hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of study. We won't
Yes.
know that for a while. Okay. The real property evaluations, 2 lines down from that. speaks to the question of real estate evaluations for facility locations. I'm not real clear I understand what that means. Are those
So-
bus stops? Are they, what?
Primarily, this is looking at how we can expand our footprint for our maintenance facility, and if we need to go off-site for that. But we can't grow this agency to the size it needs to be on our existing footprint. So that's what that property evaluation is primarily about.
Okay, so that has nothing to do with transit-oriented development issues. This is, no? Negative? Okay. The next line item down, Transportation Development Plan, the 30-year vision. Who does that study? Is that internal, or do you contract it out?
That would be contracted out.
Do you all already have somebody identified, or is there a?
No, we would be issuing an RFP for that.
Okay. Is this the kind of thing that someone like a Jared Walker might be considered for?
It would be.
Yeah. Okay, I don't want to hog the mic, Chair. I'll pass, and then if you'll promise to come back to me.
I'd make that promise on the record.
Thank you so much.
Judge, you're up.
Thank you. I just had a question out of curiosity. What factors do you take into account in determining where a route is going to go, whether it's going to go from Del Mabry to Hillsborough and Del Mabry to Tampa Bay and Del Mabry? Or how are all those, what factors you look at determining where you're placing a route and your assessment of how to locate it?
So it can be a wide variety, but primarily you do an onboard survey and ask existing customers for their origin and destination.
And these are existing routes already?
No, it can be existing customers that maybe take a combination of two routes, and you identify a singular route that could maybe get them to their destination faster. Land use is a big key. If it serves one of our three major areas like West Shore, downtown, or USF. If we have real estate for a park and ride in a location, there may be a way to do a peak hour service only from a certain location.
Okay.
So it's a wide variety, but primarily residential and commercial or employment density.
And I was looking at your maps, and it seemed to me that the furthest east you go is Dover, is that right?
Dover Park and Ride and Fishhawk.
So there's no service into the Plant City area, for example?
No, they don't currently pay into the ad valorem. They used to, so they used to have service, but they currently do not.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Kilpatrick.
Yes, thank you. So I have a couple questions. First of all, do you have a way to visualize where the distribution of the population compared to where your service routes run? Because it appears to me that your priority has been to restore previously canceled service or to improve existing service. However, the county has experienced quite a bit of growth over the last 5 to 10 years. So I'm wondering, what are you doing to address these new centers, particularly south and east, that were not previously already accounted for in your system?
So one of the reasons the service plan exists the way it does is because the infrastructure is there to reestablish the service. There are a lot of ADA requirements for bus stops, which require pretty intensive capital planning for 8 by 5 foot concrete pads and shelters and different amenities. A lot of the new development we've seen in some of the more rural areas, a lot of times, as many of us know, lack sidewalks, and the connectivity from the neighborhoods to the actual main corridor is very long and winding, which makes the appeal of transit service not very high. So that's a longer-term planning effort that we would be coordinating with the county and some of those further out areas for getting the infrastructure in place that would support transit a little better.
Okay.
If there's an open road that does not have sidewalks with a big ditch swale, we couldn't put a stop in there because it wouldn't meet ADA requirements. So we may not be able to have a stop for several miles without a pretty extensive construction effort to establish that stop. And then we would have to consider how many people are actually within a short distance of that stop. So those are part of the ways we assess that.
Yeah.
But we're definitely, we're well aware of the growth in South County and addressing that in our long-term plan. It's just the short-term needs in this plan and actually being able to implement it in this year are primarily on corridors we already serve.
Well, I guess my comment on that is it would seem that as the county is approving these developments, that public transit would be included in that plan, because when you're building a development, there are going to be people who need to get around. So I would expect that all those requirements should be built into those plans as opposed to trying to figure it out after those homes are built and those citizens are there with very limited service.
Right. So when they're reviewing those development plans now, they identify if we have existing service there. And as we know, most of this rural land, we didn't have service there. And now moving forward, once we establish our vision, we will have plans in place to serve these new areas. So future developments would have that infrastructure. But as they were built without any transit, it wasn't included.
Okay. So my next question, and I'm not sure if you can answer this or if we need to speak with someone from Hillsborough County, but I know in your plan you have this item about currently county-funded services that now HART is going to have to start covering the cost for. And when the voters approved this measure, I think it was understood that this would be additional funds and it would not replace existing funds. So I'd like to know if there's someone, if not HART, at Hillsborough County who can explain where those previous county funds are now going to be spent, if not on public transport or not on transportation.
I would interject here, and I'd really like to limit this to his presentation and Hart's presentation on what they have here. And if we got questions about county, let's ask county. But
well, it's in his presentation.
Well, if he can answer with regard to Hart, but I don't want you up there answering stuff for the county. But as you feel comfortable, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just restate that the county has agreed to continue funding that service if we do not get the surtax. But the agreement HART has entered into with the county is that if we do get surtax, that we would be funding those services.
Okay, so we've got that, the surtax funding. So now that we know you've got it, I guess I'm not following your answer.
We can't currently spend the surtax funding, so the county is currently funding that service. I don't know if there's really a better way to put this. Let Cindy Stiglich, our interim CFO, take that one.
Good evening, Cindy Stiglich, interim CFO. So the HART funding is actually going toward that service that the county was previously funding last year. So I'm not going to speak for the county, but I know that they are prepared to step in should the sales tax not be released next year. At this point, I do believe it's in their reserve. We are currently funding it with our reserve, rather than looking at any kind of service modifications for those routes that were paid for in FY19.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question about administration category. There's an $8 million entry here for labor cost and staffing. It says aligning HART's current pay practices with regional and industry-specific needs. Can you flesh that out a little bit for me? That's a big chunk of change. I would like to know more about what's included in that.
So that's really bringing our wages up to industry standards, not just with the private sector, but right now we don't compete for an entry-level wage with PSTA or our other peer transit agencies. So it makes hiring maintenance and operators very difficult and challenging.
What category of people would be eligible for this? Is this bus drivers? Is this administration? Or can you tell me that?
Let me let Cindy take that one as well.
The primary beneficiaries of this line item would be our operators and our maintenance folks. They represent about 85% of our workforce. So as Justin said, this would be looking at those wages based on those that are in the industry as well as in the area, so that we can retain, recruit, and attract, really, those people that are going to help us to expand the service.
Okay, thank you. I believe, Mr. Fernandez, I promised to come back to you, and then we'll have Mr. Chairmonte after you. Well, Mr. Fletcher has a question. Let me get him since he's a first-time participant.
Thank you. I would just want to touch on two different items. One is in the presentation you did, you've got an item where it talks about expanded public transit options. It's got an amount that goes to escrow. So that's, if I understand that right, that's just not being programmed this cycle. It'll come back in the future when to our body for approval at the appropriate time when you're ready to program those funds.
Correct.
So kind of in contrast, and under administration, you've got operating contingency. You're seeking approval now for that, and it's a contingency fund. How is that going to work? And it's listed under enhanced service, so presumably it's contingency just for things that would qualify for the enhanced service category.
So when we were thinking about whether we should put that in reserve or put it in an operating contingency, we put it in contingency primarily because we've had some federal grants that we've applied for, which we were thinking that this would be our allowable match. We have applied for some that we indicated that the sales tax would be our match, not knowing exactly what the ultimate award would be and the required match. We did put it in contingency for that purpose.
Okay.
Mr. Fernandez, and then Mr. Chairmonte.
Thank you, Chair. Justin, I guess this is kind of getting into the sausage-making process to get this. Maybe I missed it, and maybe it's just not appropriate for inclusion, but is there anything in here? Is there any money going for safety enhancements to our rolling stock for drivers? I just saw recently an article, another driver wound up being assaulted, and of course we know of the death recently. Does that filter in here somewhere?
So we're already about 60, 70% complete on the installation of those safety shields. So that's already being moved along. So the shields themselves, which I would say are the primary safety item that we're working towards most urgently, are already well on their way to being fully complete. Additional safety items?
Yeah, I believe, and I don't know the exact amount, it's not in front of me, but there's an item for camera surveillance on the buses. And so we will continue to do enhancements on the buses to ensure that we have complete coverage inside and outside of the vehicles. So there is a line item within there speaking to the cameras on the buses. I believe if it's in technology.
Third item. The third item under technology.
There we go.
Vehicle safety surveillance, modernization, and expansion.
Right. Yeah,
Item
that's 2
3
million.
under technology.
Okay, well, I'll just believe you that it's there. I'm not, oh, here it is.
In
Okay.
technology.
Item 3, vehicle safety. This part. Okay, so that's over and above the safety shield issue. This is other, okay. And I note in your rolling stock section that there are significant purchases expected in the future for both electric and compressed natural gas. Are those buses coming with these safety improvements already there, or is that an additional expense that you will have to deal with in a retrofit setting?
For the expansion buses, we will be purchasing additional shields to outfit those buses, but anything that's in it that would be a replacement bus, which we're working on primarily now, any vehicle that is currently outfitted with that would then, the new vehicles would be retrofitted with the existing technology or the existing equipment on those vehicles.
Okay, and is there is there funding available for that retrofit, or is that being anticipated here somewhere?
For the expansion vehicles,
Yes.
that would be inherent in the cost of those vehicles.
Okay, so we should read that in
Yes,
as
we
understood.
factored in extra funding in the expansion vehicles to allow for all of the technology, including CAD AVL, the shields, the surveillance equipment, and the like.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. In the hard operations and maintenance facility section, I guess, what is it, 1, 2, 3, the fourth line item down, heavy maintenance building renovation. Are you with me?
Yep.
Okay. I read the word renovation, I know what that means, because I did go to school, and then I read the description under it, and it looks like it's not a renovation, it's actually a replacement. Which is it?
Good afternoon, Linda Crescentini, Director of the Project Management Office. So we have two existing buildings out there. We have the heavy maintenance facility and we have the preventive maintenance facility. So the heavy maintenance is engines and transmissions, and then the preventive maintenance is, you know, your oil changes and your tire repairs and things like that. So to be able to have a new efficient building for the heavy maintenance, there are some modifications that need to be taken place and consolidated so that it has an easy flow that is in both buildings. So some of it is a retrofit from the existing preventive maintenance building, and some of it is new with the heavy maintenance building.
So that 33, is it million? Yeah, that $33 million in enhanced service actually applies to two separate physical structures?
They're
Is
right
that
next to each other.
Right next to each other? Okay. I guess I'm not understanding the verbiage in the last sentence there. The cost to upgrade the facility is greater than replacing it with a new facility. So what?
So our current existing heavy maintenance building, if we were to retrofit it and rehab it, it doesn't meet current wind load. It's not ADA compliant. So it has so many issues to try to retrofit the existing building that it's cheaper for us to build a new heavy maintenance building.
So that is a replacement.
The heavy maintenance building would be a replacement.
All right, and the other one is a renovation.
Correct.
Okay. I'm just going to make a editing suggestion that you might want to
Sure.
make some addendum to that in your,
Okay.
I mean, you know, I'm probably being overly pissy about this, but it just, you know, it kind of, people are going to ask us what we did and why we did it, and they're going to ask us to explain things that we said we certified, and I'd kind of like to know why.
Sure.
And I had no explanation for that one.
Okay.
Okay. Have I overstayed my welcome, or may I?
No, listen,
Oh, okay.
I want you to ask the questions that you need to ask to elicit the information you need,
Okay, well, thank you for that.
within reason.
I understand. You actually asked one of my questions already about the administrative, the $8 million number, so that's good. Let me see. Well, I guess I touched on it earlier, just briefly, and that's on the rolling stock. If I can find the page again. There. Just for my own education. You've got purchases of, you've got 10 electric buses, you have 16 compressed natural gas buses. Then, of course, you have the non-revenue vehicles that my colleague already asked you about. And then you intend to replace 40 diesel buses with compressed natural gas. What is the internal distinction that you make between CNG and EV? Why one type over another? What is the administrative machination that takes place in deciding where those dollars are going to go?
So that is also related to the maintenance facility because the amount of infrastructure we need to put in place to handle those EVs is significant. And the amount of infrastructure that the agency has invested in the CNG capacity up to this point is, in order to get the full benefit of that investment, we still need to get some of the life out of it. So if we converted now all to electric, which we can't do based on the infrastructure that it would require, it would also be a pretty big waste of a previous investment in CNG. So we're trying to balance and work our way into an electric vehicle fleet while we're also utilizing the infrastructure we already have in place for CNG, and also looping that into the maintenance discussion as we retrofit and renovate and replace the equipment and the facility we have itself. That all has to be taken into account. So, and that's basically why we have the balance of a smaller acquisition in this first year, and we would be ramping that up as we acquire more EVs moving into the future.
So is it fair, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add one point of information on that. An electric bus with the infrastructure is about $1 million, whereas a CNG vehicle is about $550,000. So for every one electric vehicle, we can buy 2 CNGs. So at the point at which we are today, where we have a fleet of 80 buses that are beyond their useful lives, we need to maximize our dollars by continuing to buy the CNG.
Okay. Is it fair to say that the trajectory, say over the 30-year life of this surtax, the trajectory is to move out of the CNG world and into the electric vehicle world, or is there always, technologies are going to change over 3 decades, but is that the trajectory we're moving toward? Just it has to be done in a fiscally responsible way?
Based on the temperature of our board, yes. And also, as the technology gets better, our routes today could not be operated by electric vehicles because they have a limited range. So that's also part of the equation. We would have to modify our service significantly in order to charge those vehicles in the middle of a shift, for example. So as that technology improves, that's also part of the equation, but I would say that is the direction as an agency we're probably headed.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. I yield.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Lemke, and then we'll go to you, Mr. Chiramonte.
I'm going back to the 3 big buckets that you have.
Sure.
And I guess my first one is, could you define enhanced bus service? I think when I hear enhanced bus service, I think more routes, more drivers, later, more weekends. And for $113 million, it seems like the actual increased enhanced bus service is such a tiny amount of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say that for somebody who's standing in the rain, enhanced bus service would be a shelter at their stop that doesn't have one right now. So I think that could, it's not just about the service on the street, it's about the comfort of our customers from when they leave their house to get to the stop.
But I think when voters hear enhanced bus service, I think, I don't know, I could be wrong. I think it sounds like more buses, more service times, you get where you want to go faster, shorter, 15-minute intervals rather than 30-minute intervals. What percentage of you think the $113 million is actually better service? Not just a shelter, but better service?
I've got to do some quick math
A
here.
guess is okay. I'm sorry.
But I can I get back to you with a?
Sure. And maybe a second question. Next year, do you see, I think the routes affected are 9 routes or something like that. I have to go count again or something like that. Next year, do you think there will be more routes? Do you think there will be?
Yeah, so one of the ways we've been describing this first year of the surtax program is resetting the baseline. And a lot of what you're seeing in this program is addressing deficiencies that have accumulated over decades. So I would say yes. We'll be looking at doing more frequency, enhancing more services, but we've also got to identify new service areas, which was mentioned earlier. But that I think you will see more, yes.
For example, back to your story, the person waiting in the rain wishes they were covered, but they also might wish for a bus to come in 15 minutes rather than 30 minutes, because that's 15 minutes of not getting wet or something. So I'm asking that question long term. I'll revisit it next year when you have. I would just encourage. I hope there's more routes with shorter times and stuff like that. And one last question: under expanded public transit options, and $83 million is going to escrow. So do you expect to use all $83 million of that next year? When do you think that's going to get spent?
I would say that's unlikely, but I mean, not.
So it will probably build for a few years
It
when
would
there's a
probably build,
project.
because that's really for a more major capital project. But you will probably see a comparable number for planning efforts to identify those major projects. So that escrow account likely will grow over the next few years.
It just sounds very exciting. I think this has the most ability to transform Hillsborough County. So I'm excited to see like these major projects and what's going to come from that. So I'll look for more bus routes next year, and I'm very excited next year to see what that 83 million doubled what it might go for.
Thanks.
Mr. Hollenkamp.
Building on Mr. Lemke's comments, I too am very excited about this, and Plant City wants to be part of that excitement, and I realize you probably didn't have a chance to include us in this year's term because you are restoring the baseline, but could you talk a bit about how Plant City plays into the future role, future plans of HART?
Sure, we're partnering with the MPO now to identify the needs of Plant City, and we have some previous services we can kind of look at as a framework for where we're going to start and evaluating. But that's, we're going to kind of see what kind of options we have based on the revenue projections and see what kind of connections Plant City residents and employees want to see. There's been talk of partnerships with going outside of the county, which would require funding from another area.
Is
but
that permitted?
Not with our funds.
Yeah,
So that would need to be a
restricted,
partnership.
right?
I'm sorry?
It's restricted, you can't go outside of the county with the
Correct.
surtax funds?
But there are opportunities through grants with the state and through FDOT District 1, where we may be able to cross to Lakeland and kind of make Plant City's dollars go farther, and also, which would also serve Hillsborough County residents fairly well. So that'll be part of the evaluation that we do with the MPO.
So just to clarify, I don't know if I completely followed. The limitation would not prevent a partnership
Correct.
with state-funded dollars, that the surtax money could be spent in that way as long as it's a state-funded.
Correct. As long as the Hillsborough County taxpayers are not paying for the service that's being operated outside of the county.
Okay.
Mr. Tremonte.
Okay, I wanted to build upon this, kind of talk about the future a little bit again. HART is the one area that I have a little bit of concern about because it's not based on dividing the money up by the jurisdictions. And we know now that the majority of your money goes into the city. And I think over time, to gain the confidence of the people who live in the county, which is 65% of the population, I think you're going to have to show that there is new service. So I think, talking about the existing users, that is important. However, you're going to have to change the paradigm a little with this extra money to figure out how you're going to get new people if we're really trying to solve our traffic issues and get people totally dependent on cars in the suburban areas out of them, with maybe not the same exact product that you have in the city. So I think you need to think about how you can identify areas that may not be using HART now, but could potentially use it with the right type of service for that particular thing, like new areas that are being developed now. We have a lot of density in the county, but I think out of fairness, that needs to play a part in the future, not exactly, but just more than we have in the past. The other thing is you talk about employment a lot, but a lot of places actually have more transit use on weekends, like Phoenix. Their light rail has more people using it on weekends than on weekdays. So it isn't just employment. There's a lot of activity centers that people want to get to in Hillsborough County that, especially since I'm semi-retired now, none of my trips are going to be work-related. They might be, I want to drop my car if they have a detail downtown at Biamonte's, and I'm going to take the bus home, or something like that, different kinds of trips, or go to, performing arts or something like that. So I think you need to think, how are you going to get information on those areas and what they want to see in the future? This is after you take care of these existing needs that you have to do this year. I totally get that. But I think you really need to think of the paradigm of not just employment, but activity centers and things of that nature, again, to look at that. The other question I had, you mentioned that some money went down from the state and federal government. Did you say that in the beginning of your presentation?
Yeah, the grant funding decreased slightly.
Is that something that's going on across the board? I guess I just want to make sure it's not going on because now they feel like we have extra money, so they don't have to do this.
No, and that's not really the issue at all. We actually had a few grants that had been awarded for routes that weren't really performing to the level that they were originally expected to perform. So those grants had amassed over the years to the point where we had reallocated that to a more successful route, the 275LX. So over the past year, all of those unexpended grants were expended. So when we say that the grants were not re-awarded, it's just we had exhausted grants that had just had gone unspent.
Okay, so it's not anything that is being done to Hillsborough County
No,
by the
it's just
state or
the route
anything?
just
Okay.
became very successful. So at this point, HART is funding that in its totality. But FDOT didn't take any money away from us.
Just to comment on the service, I do think having shelters and all that is part of the service in the sense that that's what makes, if you have to wait out in the hot sun, you're going to be less likely to use the bus. So it's a whole package of things. On Plant City, are they part of HART now or they're not, right?
No, they're not in the charter yet.
Yet, okay, but there might be a possibility that happens. Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Hunter.
Thank you. You've probably answered this before in other meetings, but my interest is a streetcar, and I see. I drive Channel Side Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and I see ads on these streetcars. What percentage of operating are these ads generating? Do you have any idea?
I don't know that off the top of my head,
That's
but I think
okay.
it's about $100,000 a year.
Come-
All of that revenue, it does go to fund the streetcar. At this point, we are being primarily funded through an FDOT grant. It's about $900,000 a year, and then the majority thereafter comes directly from the city of Tampa. So we operate the streetcar, and the city of Tampa and FDOT are those entities that primarily fund it.
Well, I note in a lot of the photographs, you don't show all the ads on these streetcars. You show the yellow ones. But I think it's much more beautiful for this city if we don't have all these ads. And my follow-up question is, as you look into the expansion into modern streetcar, hopefully you won't be considering adding, and I'll call it making ugly, the potential for modern streetcar, because I think it does beautify our neighborhoods when they see modern streetcars coming through their community. This last question is, have you done, or when do you anticipate doing the expansion of the modern streetcar? Have you begun the study? Have you awarded it? As I understand it, the streetcar system will not be the same as a modern streetcar.
Correct. There will be some upgrades specifically to the tracks to make them compatible with a modern streetcar. It's moving into project development this year, and I believe that would put us on track for service to begin 2023. I'm going to lean on the city for that. 2023 would be the expected date for 2023, 2024 for the expanded streetcar with the modern vehicles.
And the current system, will still be using these cars?
The intention, as previously discussed, is to maintain a few of the replica streetcars, but primarily have a modern fleet.
Okay. Thank you.
And Ms. Moore.
2 questions. The $8 million line item for the labor costs and staffing, I'm assuming you've already done the research to do the alignment, so none of that money is strictly for salaries. There's no study needed, correct? Okay. And the second question, as far as customer amenity improvements, in the plan of programs, I see transit center specifics, but I don't see shelter specifics, and that's my concern. In my daily route, I come across a number of stops that have no shelter. I would say the majority. I just don't see a bunch of specifics as to how, yes.
So if I may, bus stops and transit centers, light item number 5 is bus shelter improvements and expansions, and that's a $4.3 million.
Right, and how are you going to prioritize which areas?
Well, the existing prioritization happens based on the ridership at them, those locations. So we would be doing a similar effort. We're actually working on a new shelter program to replace the existing ones. But it would, again, be based on need, which is based on riders per day.
As a citizen, I think it's more important to put the shelters in where they aren't versus improving the ones that are already there.
Right, well, that may be something that we would vet with our board as we start to implement that strategy and look at enhancing some of the ones that have nothing first, and then, yeah.
Mr. Hollenkamp?
Back to Plant City. I might have a misunderstanding here, and I'd like you to clarify if possible. My understanding is that a portion of a percentage of all the tax dollars collected under the surtax goes to Hart, and Plant City is paying that tax. Therefore, Plant City is funding Hart to an extent, assuming the surtax is approved, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Lemke?
I won't belabor the point, but maybe in a mile's worth of bus route, how many bus stops would there ever be? It's impossible to have a covered shelter at every bus stop. What percentage is standard industry?
It's really hard to establish an industry standard, especially when you're comparing us to maybe a major super dense city. But I believe right now we have two-thirds of our bus stops have a shelter. But it's really it's a very complicated question because, say, in downtown where
I think it would be the opposite. Two-thirds don't have a shelter, right?
That's been my experience.
I don't think they want to give an exact measurement, but.
I understand.
But for example, in downtown,
Yeah, that's
where you have awnings on most of the businesses and you have a bus stop out front, you might not necessarily need a shelter there.
And I'm not arguing for shelters. I'm arguing the exact opposite. I think a bus rider, I rode it for 8 years. I think you'd rather have increased service with a bus every 15 minutes than a covered shelter. You get to work quicker. You can leave at different times. It's a huge deal to get increased service for
Well,
that.
if you forget your umbrella one day, just let me know.
Right?
Are there any other questions of Hart? Okay, so I have not heard any requests for information that would require them to amend their presentation. So at this time, I would say if it's appropriate, to have a motion to certify Hart's plan or do whatever the board would like to do. So at this time, I will kind of entertain whatever the commission would like to do with regard to Hart's plan.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we certify that Hart's surtax project plan for CY 2020 complies with governing law.
Senator Joyner has made a motion to certify that Hart's transportation surtax project plan for calendar year 2020 complies with governing law. Is there a second?
Yes.
Second.
Okay, lots of seconds.
Mr. Chairmonte, I think you got in there first. You have seconded. Do we have any discussion on the project plan?
Mr. Chairman, only to my normal question about have they certified that they meet it? I see a resolution from the board, but I don't see anything from their accountant,
It's on the back of
here.
chief executive officer. Okay. Certifying.
Picture of it.
Go ahead.
I think the process in your local agreement is actually for a procurement specialist, which I think is at the bottom of the second page of the packet.
John Edmondson,
They've got it.
that's your
Yes.
certifying
Yes,
officer?
I see it. Thank you. Withdraw my comment.
Any other discussion? All right, with that, let's take a roll call vote. Clerk, if you will take a roll call vote on the motion that's on the table.
Shaw?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Menendez?
Yes.
Hollenkamp?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Hunter?
Yes.
Fletcher?
Yes.
Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Lemke? Yes. Baramonte?
Yes.
Rollerson?
Yes.
Hernandez?
Yes.
And April?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Congratulations, Hart. That was a very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
All right, let's move on to the City of Tampa. If they will come forward. Did they have any?
Good evening, board members.
Good evening.
Glad to be here again. Appreciate all the time you've put in for these efforts to look through all this material and make some decisions. We provided I apologize, Jean Duncan with the City of Tampa. We provided some responses to all the questions that we received at the last board meeting, as well as some additional information to give a little more depth to some of the questions. I'm not going to reread all of the responses, that I'm sure you got those in your packet already. Generally, there were some questions about complete streets and roundabouts, so I included our ordinance, which was passed in 2012, which basically set us on a path of requiring all of our projects to look for all opportunities within the scope of the project to include complete street elements in those projects. I also included a brochure about roundabouts to give some more information about that type of intersection treatment, which is a real safe application we can use if it fits that particular intersection dynamic. There was some questions about Interbay Boulevard at the time last meeting. I think some of that was clarity to make sure that the project wasn't including any roadway widening. That particular project does not include any roadway widening, although I do believe we cleared up the issue that roadway widening is certainly allowed with these monies within certain constraints. There was another question about some neighborhood improvements, which we added more detail on. The rest of the questions, again, we provided the details to answer the questions, pretty self-explanatory. Last time, there was some general questions about supplanting, and we stated with no uncertain terms, are we supplanting any of our projects? When we were asked to do our budgets a few months ago at the City of Tampa, we did a typical gas tax impact fee budget as we do every year. We also did what we call the penny budget. And so the penny budget was adding on those additional monies with the surtax dollars. If those dollars come to us, we will apply those on top of the money we already have programmed, and hopefully that will be the outcome next year. We're keeping our fingers crossed on that. You had some questions about equity and prioritization. We talked about those issues and answered those questions. And we certainly are always looking at equity with all of our projects to spread our resources around. We do use data to make our decisions of where we're spending our money, but we also look at balancing the needs everywhere throughout our city. And we're certainly looking forward to working with the MPO as they develop more tools that give us more metrics and ways to measure equity to make sure we're doing the best job we can in terms of equity. So with that said, I look forward to your potential vote of confidence at our plan and your certification. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to take those.
Members, do we have any questions? The City of Tampa? We do not have any questions. I would certainly entertain whatever appropriate motion we have for the City of Tampa. Mr. Hunter, can you state exactly what you would like to move for the
That
record?
Independent Oversight Committee finds that the City of Tampa submittal consistent.
We got a thing in our packet that we're trying to be very
I'm sorry.
exact with. Yes, Judge.
Make a motion that we certify that the City of Tampa Transportation Surtax Plan for the calendar year 2020 complies with the governing law.
Thank you. Member Hunter made a motion.
Second.
That the
Second.
Second by Judge Menendez, made a motion and properly seconded that the IOC certify that the City of Tampa's Transportation Surtax Project Plan for calendar year 2020 complies with governing laws. Is there any discussion? Without any discussion, clerk, if you will call the roll.
Shaw?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Menendez?
Yes.
Hollenkamp?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Hunter?
Yes.
Fletcher?
Yes.
Kilpatrick?
Yes.
April?
Yes.
Lemke?
Yes.
Saramonte?
Yes.
Rollerson?
Yes.
Hernandez?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, City of Tampa.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate the vote of confidence, and we look forward to being here next year to talk about year 2. So,
I'm sure you do. All right. With that, let's move to Hillsborough County if we can.
Good evening, committee. Good evening, committee members. Lucia Garces, Deputy County Administrator, Hillsborough County. We too went back and answered those questions we believe were not specifically answered in your presentation last time, and they dealt with similarly a number of the ones that the City of Tampa had. There was a request for some of the specific project listing on resurfacing bridges and sidewalks. Those have been included in your backup. Those do represent the sidewalks, bridges, and resurfacing over and above the program that is currently funded by the Board of County Commissioners. Question to just verify that these were existing deficiencies that we were addressing, and they are. There was a specific question that dealt with lane capacity, additional lane capacity, and I had indicated to you that the 4 projects that were identified on the list, and we went back and verified, indeed it is Gibsonton, Lutz Lake, Fern, Orient, and Sly Avenue. Those are the only 4 where we are contemplating lane capacity increases, and those are only slated for the initial phases of project development design right now, but those are the only 4. Also, a definition of complete streets, which we've included in the backup, was included in the overview, and it's been provided by our consultant. A question about alignment with the LRTP and working with other jurisdictions. We are doing that. Prioritization is also included in your backup. And then a request for, I don't have my glasses on today, so I'm struggling a bit. Thank you, CCTV. I've used my phone before, but if you use the camera, it works. Whether or not CCTV is being used for any, to address any, to make sure that we are not intruding on any privacy issues, and we are not. Those are consistent with all of the kind of traffic monitoring that we have done in the past. And then the last one was about developers funding road construction. So on that one, since we have adopted the mobility fee ordinance in 2016, at that point, this thing called concurrency went away, and concurrency was really the vehicle by which developers were constructing new roadways. And so now, with a substantially increased mobility fee, we are using those for the construction of additional roadways. And then also coordination with other agencies, and we've included that in your backup as well. So I think that addresses the questions that you had. Available to answer any more, or?
Members, do you have any questions of Hillsborough County?
Well, yeah, I'll ask my question about the previously county-funded routes for HART. Is that anywhere accounted for in your budget, or
No,
would that
it
be
is
taken care of?
Good question. It is not addressed as part of this surtax. So what our Board of County Commissioners did at least 2 years in a row is they have allocated $2.35 million for, at that point, before the surtax, for supplementary service. And in this last year, they essentially allocated the $2.35 as a bridge contingent on whether the surtax passes or not. So it was to ensure that there could be funds available to HART in the event it didn't pass.
Any other questions of Hillsborough County? If not, then I'll certainly entertain the appropriate motion with regard to Hillsborough County.
I'd like to make that motion. I'd like to make a motion that we certify the Hillsborough County Transportation Surtax Project Plan for year 2020, and that it complies with governing law.
Second.
Who's second? Okay. Mr. Chairmonte has made a motion to certify that Hillsborough County's Transportation Surtax Project Plan for calendar year 2020 complies with governing law. There was a proper second by Mr. Aprile. Is there any discussion? If not, then if the clerk will read the roll.
Shaw?
Yes.
Gunner?
Yes.
Menendez?
Yes.
Hollenkamp?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Hunter?
Yes.
Fletcher?
Yes.
Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Lemke?
Yes.
Charamonte?
Yes.
Rollerson?
Yes.
Hernandez?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We thank you for your diligence and your passion, and we too look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you. All right, let's move to Temple Terrace. And let me say this while they're coming up. At the last meeting, if you remember, we had a presentation from Temple Terrace. We reviewed it. Now, members, I'm sure you got it at the same time I did today, with not much time to review what they want us to review today and certify. So I'm going to ask you at the outset kind of what happened and why are we getting this information now? And I'm not trying to beat up on you, but it takes time for us to look at all this stuff, and we're being asked to certify some very important stuff. And it's for us to get it the day before that we need the information. So with that, if you'll just answer that and then go ahead to your presentation.
Agreed, Mr. Chairman. My name is Troy Tench. I'm the Public Works Utilities Director for the City of Temple Terrace. Apologize for the late nature of this. We were given direction by our City Council on Tuesday, the 19th, that they wanted to have us revise our plan so that we were to add projects, pull projects forward that were already in the initial plan that we provided. They were just they were programmed for later years. That they wanted us to specifically pull projects forward regarding transportation, roadway, sidewalks, and wayfinding, so signage, to this year, so that we spend every dollar that's available for us during this calendar year. So that was the reasoning behind that. I understand it. Obviously, it was very late in the game, and I wish we could have done things differently, but that was the direction I was given by my governing body. So that's the direction we indeed headed in.
Thank you.
And I hope to be able to maybe kind of clarify some of those other issues during the presentation.
I will say this at the outset. I see some numbers here that are for other calendar years. And what I might ask you to do is to focus today on what's the appropriate year that we're here for today. And maybe if you come back, we'll talk about those years. If you can, let's focus on the calendar year.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. The presentation that I will have only speaks to the calendar year 2020.
Great, thank you.
So again, as you indicated earlier, we did initially provide a project plan in the $250,000 range. It was a small portion, about 10% of what we anticipate. However, on Tuesday, the 19th, City Council instructed us to revise that plan so that we move forward with projects, bring some of those projects forward that we had, again, programmed out for later years forward, so that we meet the intent of spending the available funds that the surtax will generate. So I do want to indicate there are no new projects proposed. Again, the list has changed slightly, but this is the same set of projects that was given to you back in September. Again, they were just programmed out for later years. So we did not add anything new to this list. We just pulled those forward. So that said, let's go ahead and get started with the projects, again, focusing on roadway, sidewalk, and wayfinding. The first project is for the milling and resurfacing and full depth reclamation of several streets within the south central portion of the City of Temple Terrace. These streets are in need of of some maintenance and kind of keep up with that pavement management process, that plan, we felt it necessary to bring these projects forward for funding under this effort, under the SIR plan. We have a resurfacing project for a small street located in the Telecom Parkway, our Telecom community. It's a industrial park located in another northern portion of the city of Temple Terrace. We have a much larger FDR project for a roadway that's really in need of some improvements. We're having some base failure and some other issues, so we're proposing to do that full depth reclamation, which again takes a much broader profile and kind of grinds it all up and puts it back down to give you that base that you need.
Excuse me, ILC, Vinny Carrazza, city engineer. I noticed a lot of people are actually looking through the plans that I handed out earlier. If you want to follow along, it's in the pullout, and all the plans that Director Chinch is talking about, the R4, if you follow on your list, it might be easier rather than, exactly. So the projects that he's talking about are listed in the red text with the amount, just to try to get everybody on board. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Vinny.
ROO.
The next project, we're proposing to do micro surfacing within a community called Raintree. Again, this is in the north central portion of the city of Temple Terrace. This is a treatment option that is not quite as extensive as like a mill and resurface, but we felt it would be an ideal location to implement this process. In that same community, there are some streets that have degraded a little bit further, so we would be looking to, there's more traditional mill and overlay within that community. In addition, we have one of our major thoroughfares, what would be almost considered a collector within Temple Terrace, Whiteway Drive. This project, along with the project I'm going to speak about next, basically would be for the resurfacing of that linear east-west corridor. It's really, within this area, you have a school, you have some other amenities, city amenities that are important that we make sure we have proper access to. Druid Hills, again, this is a parallel street. Again, more of a collector, and we're looking to, again, mill and resurface this particular street. And finally, sandwiched in between Whiteway Drive and River Hills are a number of cross streets. So we would be looking to go through several different pavement options, maybe some micro surfacing, some mill and resurface, as well as full depth reclamation to make sure that those streets are maintained within that pavement management plan. Next up, we have a sidewalk project. This project is calls for construction within the Woodmont Charter School area. Currently, there are no sidewalks within the community, or there are limited sidewalks. So we would be connecting existing sidewalks as well as constructing new to allow for better pedestrian access to that particular facility, as well as within the city itself. Lastly, the next two projects are wayfinding. We have our city divided up into 12 zones. So we would be replacing signage within zones 5, 7, 9, and 11. And in addition, we would also look to be improving some pavement marking within those same locations. I realize I went through this rather quickly, and again, I know there are likely a number of questions regarding why so late and why we decided to go this route. I'll be happy to try and address those at this time.
Let me start here. Staff, will you speak to the amount of money, because this is an issue that's come up. How much money is Temple Terrace entitled to under the surtax for calendar year 2020?
IOC members, Johnny Wong, your staff support. So I apologize that we weren't able to provide a more comprehensive review of the plan, but as all of you received it a little bit late, we did as well. And so we weren't able to provide a comprehensive review, but just on a very cursory review, we noticed that it appears Temple Terrace has over budgeted their projects for calendar year 2020 by about $980,000. And that kind of raises questions for us about what happens if funds are exhausted, and it raises process questions such as, if the funds are exhausted, which projects are selected to move forward to later years and which will be completed in the calendar year?
So could you respond to that?
So we obviously did overestimate the construction of a lot of these projects, understanding, first of all, that they are estimates. So these estimates may not be actual engineering costs. So we may be able to get more bang for our buck and do more projects than we anticipate. So that's one thing. The other is there may be some of the projects that are on this list that have other underlying issues that have to be addressed. And it may be determined, again, by the governing body, the city council, that they want to push that project out to address other issues, say maybe drainage or sewer issues, before they move forward with the resurfacing effort. Because you obviously would not want to resurface a roadway and then have an issue with going back and fixing the utility.
You're still before us today asking for more money than you were entitled to for the calendar year.
Correct.
Your project, as you're submitting it to us, is asking for more money than you're entitled to. That is an issue. And I don't know how the board or the committee is going to deal with that issue, but that's an issue that you're going to have to figure out a way to get over. I don't, and this is my personal belief, but maybe we do better on certain projects, and maybe I don't. I think the project ought to come to us compliant with how much money you're entitled to. That is my opinion. I'm certainly open to other board members to ask whatever questions and other things you have, but I'm going to want probably our lawyer at some point to speak on what it means that your submitted project is over what you're entitled to under the surtax for this calendar year. But yes, Mr. Chairman.
I just want to add on one thing, since the lawyer's probably going to get up and speak. Temple Terrace and Plant City are under different rules than the other jurisdictions. And the most important thing I think we were looking to do is make sure that the money was being spent in the right percentages, but they don't have that requirement. So they're different than the other three jurisdictions. So I just think we need to keep that in mind. But obviously, that is a problem we have to deal with, what you brought up, so.
Mr. Fletcher.
Well, I still think we have a role making sure that the proposed projects fit the uses allowable under the statute. So there's that
Right.
as well.
And this would be.
And I would look to council to advise on that. But that is a role I think we have. They don't have the same buckets, and although they did put them in the buckets in this plan document, they're not held to those, but there's still limitations on the statutory limitations.
But what they're proposing here would fit into one of those buckets, obviously, because maintenance of roads is one of the things that can be done, correct, Tony? In all the jurisdictions. So
I think for this fiscal year, I'm comfortable that everything they proposed is within the scope of the statute.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Council, can you?
Can I add something to
Yeah,
that?
sure.
Well, I do think, obviously, you're not under the exact same rules and the same percentages, but like I noticed, there's no congestion reduction. I would think for your own folks in Temple Terrace, if congestion gets worse in Temple Terrace, they're going to wonder why money's being spent and congestion's getting worse. That seems to me that you guys will have to answer for that at some point. Just a thought.
Council, can you address these issues?
I can try. Sam Hamilton, County Attorney's Office. Let me just confirm that, as a couple of the members had mentioned, being one of the smaller jurisdictions, meaning they will not receive more than 5% of the proceeds. They are not subject to the expenditure buckets, that some of the other jurisdictions are subject to. However, there still is the statutory framework for the various uses, and I think Mr. Fletcher had pointed that out. So there is still obviously a role that their projects as submitted have to comply with the state statute which governs the use of these surtax monies. That's the first point. Now, it wasn't really clear if, I know you'd asked me that. I know there was a funding issue, that there was a question. If you could rephrase or restate that question on the funding.
I'm sorry?
There was, I think somebody else had a question about the actual expenditure, the amount of money that they're reflecting in their project plan for this year, and I wasn't clear on what the question was.
Was that my question?
I think so.
They're over
think it
budget.
was.
They're over budget. What does that mean with regard to their plan?
My view is what the IOC's role is to review the projects as presented to see if they are compliant with the relevant statute. In this case, as I said, it's just the statutory framework. The city's role or its obligation, the project plan is supposed to be limited to the projects for which they plan to spend their share of the surtax monies in the following calendar year. There appears to have been some issue that they may have submitted, and quite frankly, it's not clear to me, but they may have submitted what is commonly referred to as their capital improvement program, which is actually under special act. Jurisdictions in this county are subject to compliance with a special act that typically calls for a 5-year, what's commonly referred to as a CIP, which, as I said, is the capital improvement program. It's sort of a document that runs in tandem. It's a multi-year document, and it sort of rolls. As 1 year rolls off, you add the back year, and it just continues to roll. And it's a multi-year plan. It's not a budget document. You can go down to the bare bones, and it does have numbers in it, dollar amounts and such, but it's obviously a long-term planning vehicle, if you will, that's programmatic. And there's certainly no issue with having capital projects that are in your annual surtax plan being in that CIP plan. They actually should be at some point, because there is a requirement. There's a as part of the annual budget process, there is a separate public hearing where that CIP is approved by each of the respective jurisdictions, et cetera. In this case, though, the IOC's role is to review the project plans as submitted under the charter amendment and the other documents associated with what we kind of refer to as the governing law, if you will, because it's sort of a collective. The project plan is what the agency plans to spend their share of the money on in the following calendar year. In this case, it would be 2020. Now, because of the unique nature of this, I know certainly with respect to Hillsborough County and possibly some of the other jurisdictions, they may be spending a combination of the 2019 dollars as collected plus the anticipated amounts for 2020. That obviously won't continue down the road, because as this rolls through, providing things go well in Tallahassee early next year, it'll be more of an annualized type situation. But if they have over-allotted, if you will, I don't know that that technically creates an issue. I think it's a fair question. I think it does deserve an answer to that question. If their anticipated revenue is, or if their anticipated expenditures, obviously it's a bit of a plus or minus, but I'm not sure what the numbers are in this case, because I did not really have an opportunity to see all of the backup. But if there's a dramatic difference, that certainly is a fair question that I think calls for, to be asked and an answer. Hopefully that answers the question. I'm not sure it did, but hopefully it did.
Mr. Fletcher, then Mr. Moore. I mean, Mrs. Moore, sorry.
So I'm struggling a little bit, I think partly because the timing we got this, to understand exactly what we're being asked to approve. There's items listed as the 2020 calendar year, and then I think the city engineer had referenced that the red ones maybe have a different meaning than the ones that aren't red. And so if we can get clarity on that we're just acting on the ones for this fiscal year, or which ones we're being asked to act on, I might get comfortable going forward today, but I'm at a place where I'm thinking maybe we ask that we continue this till the next scheduled meeting, which I think is in December. We get a little more clarity on what we're being asked to vote on, and then we go there. I'm not set on that as a process, but I did kind of want to throw that out there as an option, because, like I said, I'm struggling a little bit to know exactly what we're being asked to vote on.
Mr. Chair, if I could add one other point too, just for the benefit of the group. When I was speaking to the capital improvement program, one other issue to keep in mind, there there is a timing differential here. Just want to throw this out. The capital improvement programs, I mean, the governments, the three cities, the county, and Hart are subject to an October 1st fiscal year. Some of the other, like the state of Florida, has a different fiscal year, but we're not on a calendar year basis. It's a fiscal year of October 1st. Its budgets are set up that way, but also the CIP is based on it's a 5-year plan, but it's based on the same October 1st. Contrast that with the way the charter amendment and the other various documents comprising the governing law, the plan you're looking at is not based on a fiscal year. It's based on the ensuing calendar year. So there is sort of that dynamic. It's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with that. It just kind of creates that little bit of distinction. So I just wanted to make clear that these plans are not based on fiscal years. Frankly, I'm sure most of the public officers involved with these on the administrative side would prefer it if they were, but that's not what the charter document says. It's based on a calendar year. So I just wanted to throw that out too.
Committee member Fletcher, if I could, if you look in the document itself, the city engineer actually certified the plan for 2020. So we're only asking, even though we have projects in there beyond 2020, we're only asking for those projects that are listed in calendar year 2020 to be certified. So I don't know if that addresses your concern.
So what's the differentiation with the colored numbers?
The colored numbers simply represent sidewalk, roadway, trails. So it's just a color coding that we use to kind of help us track which projects are defined under which category.
Okay, thank you.
Are you talking about the red text?
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry.
Ms.
So-
Moore actually
The red
points
text?
me out to the footnote.
So the red text are the projects that we brought forward. Again, we reprogrammed that were originally programmed out past 2020. And so those have all now been brought forward to calendar year 2020.
I've got Ms. Moore, Judge Menendez, and Mr. April.
So with that in mind, it still seems to me that this was done in haste. And even though I know we're only here to approve the projects and that they align, I'm still a numbers person, and I like things to add up.
Absolutely.
So I would feel more comfortable if it was balanced, and just removing one or two of those projects that you move forward would accomplish that.
Right.
I would feel more comfortable, but I'm speaking for myself.
May I assert that I suspect the city of Tampa, the county, will likely have projects that roll to the corresponding year, because I think once they get into these projects, they're going to find out, A, their estimates are maybe a bit off, more expensive to construct some of these projects than were anticipated. We tried to get in front of that a little bit, and maybe wrongfully so, our thought being that we would have a contingency of projects that if as we wind up that calendar year, we look and say, well, we have a couple $100,000 left. Let's go ahead and bring these projects that were towards the bottom of the list, let's go ahead and get those done as well, versus trying to carry those dollars over or push projects out.
So if I understand that statement correctly, you overestimated enough so that if you did have a surplus, you'd be able to cover all of these with that difference?
Yes, ma'am. Well, a portion of those, yes.
Judge.
When the concern about it being over budget, is that over budget with regard to the 2020 projects, or does that include because there's other years in here too, as you know?
Just 2020.
My concern was just 2020.
So just the 2020 appear to be over?
Yes.
900,000, yeah.
You're good, Judge? I'm sorry, Mr. April.
Yeah, my question.
I got you.
Microphone.
My question to Mr. Hamilton would be that in the event that we underspend this money that is projected to be spent, that money is able to be carried over into the following year.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right.
This came up earlier with, I think it was Hart, that it had escrowed some of the monies. And if my recollection and understanding is correct, when Temple Terrace made their original presentation, and I do not remember the numbers, but the anticipated budget for the projects that they were seeking your approval on was far below the estimated receipts for calendar 2020. I mean, it wasn't even close. It was much, much less. So there was always sort of an anticipation, at least from my perspective and others, that at the point in time when the city decided what to do with the balance of the funds, if you will, that it would come back through the process, meaning it would have to be approved. Those additional projects would have to be approved by its city council, and then it would come back to this body for certification. It's kind of the same sort of thing. I mean, that's the audit perspective for next year is not going to be such an issue because there haven't been any project expenditures, and there probably will not be by the time the audit is done because of the ongoing litigation. But assuming, knock on wood, the litigation goes successfully, the audit for 2021, there'll be a lot more work involved there because, now we're kind of on the front end where this is just a plan. A budget is just a plan. There's no guarantee that every single one of the projects in any of these jurisdictions' plans are actually going to get completed. Things happen. Cost estimates, I'm not an engineer, but the engineers will tell you they're just cost estimates. Likewise, on the tax estimate side, those are just estimates too. Those numbers can go up, they can go down. It just depends upon the general economy. But certainly if there's money left over with any particular jurisdiction, it's not a circumstance, use it or lose it. That is not the case.
Thank you.
Ms. Kilpatrick, Mr. Hunter, Mr. Fletcher.
Yes, I just want to understand if you get to the end of the year and you're not able to complete all of the projects, if your funds run out or time runs out, is the expectation that you'll just roll those forward to the next year, or do you have some plan to fund those from an alternate source like your city budget or something like that?
The intent would be then to take everything back to the governing body, the city council, and ask them if they would like to roll those projects forward, as well as any projects that we currently have on the docket for that calendar year.
Mr. Hunter.
Yes, I tend to be more comfortable with coming closer to what's projected funding, and perhaps guesstimate the other way in that I don't know what the percentage is that you've overestimated, but you can always roll over the money.
Correct.
It seems to me, so that if you've come close to your projects at the end of the year, if you've underfunded, you can certainly put it in the next year and fund it. And we haven't approved of something that for which money's not there.
Right.
As opposed to, hey, it's fine, 20% over budget's fine, no big deal, I'm not comfortable with that from my perspective. Whereas if you come closer to the target and you've underfunded it, you can pick it up the next year. If we've again, I go back, if we've approved it and you've over budgeted, my concern is the criticism that we've just give you carte blanche. Why even look at the numbers then? Put down 20 projects or 30 projects because you can catch it the next year, is my worry.
Understandable. And again, I think what we were trying to do was,
I understand.
yeah, go on the opposite, look at the opposite side, and maybe be.
Well, I know how engineers estimate too. So.
Right.
Mr. Fletcher.
Sorry, I was just having a sidebar with the county
Absolutely.
attorney. So I'm starting to get comfortable with the idea of having more in your buckets than are going to come in during the calendar year.
Right.
And I guess there's two options. One is, would you all be looking to supplement so that these dollars would include estimates that are beyond just our surtax, in which case that's fine, you're making up that difference there. Or I guess the other way to look at it is we would just be encumbering going forward so that you can spend, so basically these are what you get to spend until you run out of money.
Right. The intent of the city would be to spend only the money that we have available through the surtax.
Okay.
There's no, at this time, there are no additional dollars that have been set aside for funding of projects. Now, that's not to say if there's a project that comes towards the end of the cycle, we really think it's a good project, maybe we have a little bit of money left over in our CIP program, that we could shift some dollars over. But really, the focus of this plan is to utilize the dollars within the surtax and only those dollars. And once those have been extinguished, then we would hold for the following year.
So essentially, we'd be advance approving until such time as the flow of funds covered the cost of the projects.
Well, I think you're certified for 2020. Next year, 2021, we will have a new plan. Now, there may be some of these projects on here, but we're certainly not anticipating that because you approved it in 20, you're going to approve it in 21. I don't think that's the intent of what we're trying to accomplish here. I think it's merely, let's get a list of projects together. Is it greater than what we anticipate with revenue? Yes. If we don't get all these projects constructed, what will we do? We will likely roll those forward, and then in 2021, bring them back and say, do you approve of these projects? Do you believe they meet the intent of the amendment?
I have another question.
Mr. Rawlinson? So if you have a project, let's say that you've been very frugal.
Yes.
And let's say you have $300,000. You finished your projects and you have $300,000 remaining. Your concern is that, well, for that $300,000, now we've already as a group approved your other projects that you can use that $300,000 for.
Yes.
So my question is, what happens if that occurs and you have $300,000 available in funds but no approved projects, certified projects? That's a great question. If you have no certified projects, what happens to the $300,000?
Rolls forward.
Well, it would sit, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. It would sit until they came back and got more projects approved.
Okay.
Right.
So they wouldn't lose it, obviously.
Right.
It would just be a timing issue. You wouldn't get those projects completed as fast as you would like.
Correct.
But you wouldn't lose it. So maybe that's where your strategic thinking is if we can have that bucket so that if we do have money available, we have projects already approved that we can put that into and just get them completed that much faster.
And just to speak to that, that's an excellent example. You more or less have now cut out about 30 to 60 days from us to bring that forward to the group then to mull that over for a month to come back to us and say, yes, you're good to go. We would have those projects already in the wings, if you will, waiting. We could just bring that project. We have now funding for that and start construction.
I agree with Mr. Hunter that we may want to try and get a little closer to the allotted money, so that we don't go haywire, that we're being reasonable about it. But again, reasonable, you're not going to have exact precision on any engineering job. I don't care what you're doing.
Right.
So we just kind of have to say, well, is there wiggle room here to be able to accommodate that? I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm willing to explore that and say, well, if we can approve a more modest number so that we do have some wiggle room and you can accomplish what you want. I think it's a great idea. I understand why you're doing it. But we have to certify.
Absolutely.
So we have to be comfortable with, we're certifying the correct dollars for the correct projects. That's it. But I'm good to have more discussion on it.
Ms. Kilpatrick.
Yes, do you have a prioritization for the projects that are over budget? Like what are you going to do first within the money that you're allocated? And then which of these projects are your contingency should you have additional money at the end of the cycle?
We will sit down with the city council, prioritize those projects as they see fit. And again, as we work down the line, we will probably have a couple of projects that we realize funding-wise may not be able to be accomplished. But as we move through the year and realize some savings, some cost savings, there's a possibility then to look at some of those projects that were lower on the list.
Yeah, Mr. Hunter.
Just to follow up on Dan's thinking, in that as you move down the calendar year, and you've got, as an example, 300,000 is looking like you might have. We're only looking at 2020. You're showing us through your CIP, I think, the rest of your years. We're not looking at that.
No, sir.
We're not looking at the projects you've listed there. So I'm saying, please don't assume we're looking at 21 and approving your projects there.
No, sir.
If you have an extra 300,000 to put there.
It would only be for 2020. And moving forward,
Stop.
on our end, we will only provide you with the calendar year. We won't provide you with projects beyond that.
We're seeing them now.
Yes, you are now, but you will not in the future.
And the language of whatever motion we adopt or do will be clear in that. I guess I'm getting more comfortable, but 20% wiggle room, if we gave that to Hart,
Yes,
that'd be a lot of money.
absolutely.
So I would just say, please, going forward, at least from this member's point of view, there needs to be less wiggle room than that.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
If I could speak to that, I'm getting comfortable with it with Temple Terrace because there's no percentage allocation requirement for the small cities.
Yes, sir.
I think this would create a problem if we had this model for those agencies that have the different percentages, because you would run the risk of having allocations approved that don't comply with the percentage requirements. So in this instance, I'm getting comfortable with the idea of giving them a little more advance approval.
Mr. April.
Yeah, I think that where the problem came in, that Troy was instructed by city manager to only submit the small amount at the beginning. He had all this, you've seen all these projects. And when council saw that that's all that was presented, they were upset with it. I was at the meeting, and they requested that he bring it back to us. Now, the other option would have been that we have another special meeting to certify Temple Terrace. And, you know, I know it's very difficult for all of these members to have extra meetings. And, you know, this is why we're here today. We figured we had a 4-hour meeting and to get everybody comfortable with it. And I don't think Temple Terrace is asking for anything that is not, you know, appropriate for the surtax. The amount in question, it's over budget, but it is what it is.
Mr. Rawlinson.
Mr. Chair, thank you. So I think that our check and balance is that they ain't gonna get no more money than they can get anyway. Right?
Right.
So if they can't get any more money, but all the projects that they've submitted to us, we see as compliant, I think we're there. I think we have a statutory internal control, as it were, that they can't get any more money than they are statutorily allowed to get. So if that's the case, you know, they could have gone for 20 million, and they're only going to get, how much is it, your allotment?
2.5.
2.5 million?
2.2.
So they're still only going to get 2.2 million no matter what we certify. Is that correct? We're not certifying additional amount, we're certifying.
I think that is correct.
Yes.
We're certifying the compliance of the projects. And once we've done that and we've covered their request, then they're only going to get the money that they're legally entitled to. So I think, I'm comfortable with that completely now.
Mr. Lemke.
I'm comfortable with that, but I do wish we would note it perhaps when we make our motion. I think the other thing, I think last month you thought you couldn't spend the full amount, and that's why you put in fewer. I think that's what you said last month, so I'm not sure that they're going to spend the amount anyway. So based on what you said last month.
That was the direction from the city manager. Again, he felt that he wanted to ease into this process. In my opinion, the projects that we're proposing here are low-hanging fruit. They're relatively easy to construct, and I feel comfortable that we can spend the money that's allotted to us this calendar year.
Ms. Moore and then Mr. Fernandez.
I am a little bit more comfortable now, as some of the other committee members are. However, as a person that does public records requests
Yes,
for a
ma'am.
living,
Yes.
I needed to specify the conversations that we're having here so that when Channel 10 or whoever gets a hold of the document and sees a deficit of almost $100,000, the answer's there, they don't have to do any additional digging.
Understood.
Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I guess three things, I think, is what I had in my head. First, I was ready to vote for your plan last month.
Yes.
If we had moved it to certification, I would have done it then. Second, on perusal, I don't see anything in your spreadsheet here that is objectionable. So I would still be certainly prepared to move to certify. However, frankly, I would not vote for this because of the $1 million discrepancy.
Overture.
I just can't vote for something that is $1 million over budget and it's staring me in the face. So, and it strikes me that it would not be all that difficult to go back and jiggle the numbers around to whatever extent need to be done so that that number comes within the allocated budget amount. So I would, it seems the sense of the group is to let it go forward. I just, in the interest of full disclosure, I just want you to understand, I will not vote for that reason. That's all.
Mr. Hollenkamp.
My feeling, I think, is contrary. And it's because one of my concerns with this board is that we stay within the confines of what we're allowed to do. And I worry that if we have any overreach, it's something that could affect litigation in Tallahassee. I very much want this to go forward, and I don't want to do anything to jeopardize that. So because I don't believe we have the right to dictate what money should be spent and where, just as long as it's within the buckets, if we believe that it's within the buckets, I believe that we should approve it.
That's a projected funding.
Mr. Chiramontes.
I just want to add on to that. I strongly agree with you on what you just said. I think that it is important that we keep, what we're supposed to be doing are these projects acceptable with the parameters of what the legislation says, and they are acceptable. So I think you can note the budget issue, but I don't think that's a reason for us not to certify those projects.
I don't think we need to note it. I think the discussion is revealing itself, and people will vote as they intend to vote. Ms. Rollison.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we certify that the agency's transportation surtax project plan for year 2020 complies with the governing law.
I second.
Mr. Rollison has made a motion that the Temple Terrace plan, Ms. Rollison, to certify that Temple Terrace's transportation surtax project plan for calendar year 2020 complies with governing law. Mr. Hollenkamp has properly seconded that motion. Do we have any discussion?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Hunter.
I agree with the motion. I just raised it for discussion purposes, perhaps a consideration that a phrase be added. I know we've been instructed on the motion, but that Temple Terrace will not exceed the projected funding for calendar year 2020 beyond the amount of $2,422,462. Should we put a dollar amount in there as I raise a question? I know it will vary, but.
Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sam, you want to say something?
Yeah, Sam Hamilton, County Attorney's Office. This kind of goes back to some of the earlier comments. I do have a concern that may be sort of encroaching into an area that may be outside of your domain, in the sense that you're certifying that the projects comply with relevant law. You're not really approving budgets, and I definitely understand the concern. Don't misunderstand me. But I do have a little bit of that concern that it may be it could be viewed, if you will. I don't think that's the intent, but I do feel that it could be viewed as overstepping.
I'll withdraw my comment.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion, pending motion? All right, with that, clerk, if you'll call the roll.
Shaw?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Menendez?
Yes.
Hollenkamp?
Yes.
Moore?
Nay.
Hunter?
Yes.
Fletcher?
Yes.
Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Brill?
Yes.
Lemke?
Yes.
Charamonte?
Yes.
Rolison?
Yes.
Fernandez?
No.
Motion carried, Moore. Fernandez voted no.
Thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to 2021, and I promise we'll get it right.
I
And on
hope
time,
so.
not at the last minute.
Thank you.
Good job.
Appreciate that.
Yes.
Plant City.
Days, you did a good job.
Got some big fans on this board, Plant City.
Better not be over budget.
I know one thing.
First question I have, I'm Mike Shank, I'm the city engineer for Plant City. First question is, what is the actual budget that I'm supposed to be aiming at? Because I noticed that the last meeting, it was 1.7 million, and I think our amount is a little bit more than Temple Terrace, so I'm assuming it's 2-point-something million? Is that correct?
Hold on 1 minute, see if we can get that for you.
And I'll answer that question in regards to whether or not I'm over budget.
Shut up, man. I think you've shut it.
Sorry, I don't have your revenue estimates. You're asking what the projected amount is for 19 and 2020?
The amount of money that is projected to be in the city's coffers by the time this project goes through, okay? And the reason I ask is because I noticed that in the last meeting, it was 1.7-something million dollars, and I've been told by my CFO that it's going to be somewhere around $2.3 million, okay? So by the time we get to this point.
The other agencies have been using the revenue estimates projected through 2020 provided to them by the Hillsborough County Management and Budget Office. So, I mean, I guess my suggestion would be to consult that document.
Yeah, I was just going to add also, the Budget Office, actually, the State of Florida Department of Revenue has a huge database that they work with one of the, I always forget the name, I think it's Demographic Research, the Florida Legislature. They've got a very, very good website if anybody's interested that you can literally look at every county, see what sales taxes they have, and it has all the numbers, last year's revenues, and they have estimates for going forward. So that information is very readily available.
Okay.
Do you have any changes or
No
addendums
changes.
or any of that good stuff?
No changes at all.
Okay. So you are resting on your laurels. I appreciate that. Members, do we have any questions of Plant City? Yes, Ms. Kilpatrick.
Well, I have a question, not specific to Plant City, but if it turns out that the revenue is greater than the amount, excuse me, that has been certified, what happens then? Does that mean that they cannot spend the additional money until they come back and get those plans certified?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just wanted clarification.
Unless those projects are over, in which they can still go forward with the projects we approved. If they're over budget too, then it coincides, and I would think then you could.
Projects. Mr. Chiramonte.
Just a general question. This is based on the actual tax revenue that each jurisdiction produces? Is that what it's based on?
I don't know all the factors that go.
I mean, it's not based on population or something like that. It's
I'm sorry,
based
Ray,
on actual.
I'm sorry, I really don't know. For 19, they obviously have the most recently available data, i.e. like they check what's in the bank account, but I'm not sure what goes into projecting for 2020.
Well, not just 2020, just generally. Is it based on that jurisdiction's sales tax? Like you could have a jurisdiction that's just houses and they wouldn't generate any sales tax, even though they had a large population. I'm just curious as to how that's done.
Can we go to point of order and?
I don't know how it's, if there's any questions of Plant City, I
I
will
guess all
entertain
the
those.
time I was thinking it's based on population, but it
Well, no.
isn't based on population.
Part of part of it, there is a distribution formula with
Okay.
the general purpose portion, but that doesn't apply across the board. I mean, the portion that Hart receives, for instance, is just a percentage, and I've got to look at the
Well,
numbers.
I understand Hart, but
Yeah.
on the jurisdiction, like Hillsborough County's part, is that based on the
Yeah,
population?
there's a population
or the actual?
formula that the charter amendment actually adopts a provision out of Florida law that applies with certain other tax distributions. It wouldn't necessarily have to apply here, but the way the charter amendment was written, it incorporates that, and it is based in part on population, correct?
Okay, all right. That's,
Any questions of Plant City or an appropriate motion if the,
I'd like to make a motion that we certify that the City of Plant City's Transportation Surtax Project Plan for calendar year 2020 complies with governing law.
there's a motion by Mr. Hollenkamp to certify that Plant City's Transportation Surtax Project Plan for calendar year 2020 complies with governing law. It has been properly seconded by Mr. April. Is there any discussion? If there is no discussion, clerk, if you will call the roll.
Shaw?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Menendez?
Yes.
Hollenkamp?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Hunter?
Yes.
Fletcher?
Yes.
Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Brill?
Yes.
Lemke?
Yes.
Chiramonte?
yes.
Rollerson?
Yes.
Fernandez?
Yes.
Motion carried.
There you go, Plant City. Congratulations. All right, members, take a deep breath. We are past the meat of it. We've just got some housekeeping matters to attend to. Are there any status reports? I don't think there's any status reports. Old business, Senator Joyner, I know you wanted to address the cost estimates for the surtax legal defense. That's included in the minutes there, so that information is there. I don't think we are going to have a next meeting December 9th at 5 o'clock. Is that correct? I miss you, Mr. Hunter, but I don't think I'm going to see it. So there will not be a meeting December 9th. Before I adjourn, is there any for the good of the order business?
Yes, please have Ms. Sullivan Moore to send out a deletion for that date.
Oh, yeah. You seem to be technically able to reply all to everybody.
Dr. Wong is my witness. I showed him.
Mr. Hollenkamp.
I just want to say Merry Christmas because we're not going to have a meeting until the next year.
That is true. So happy holidays and Merry Christmas and all that good stuff. And to the people in the audience who made all these submissions, that's a lot of hard work, and we appreciate that. And with that, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Good meeting, sir.
Yeah.
Good job.